to foreign investments in order to advance its economy for the welfare of its citizens. Although my parents had stable jobs, we were poor. Everyone was poor during that time. I was taught to be polite, courteous, and have a good work ethic. My grandparents often say, keep your heads down and work hard. If you are successful, it does not matter what others do or think about you. In the 13 years of living in Washington, D.C. area, I stayed quiet at the occasional strange looks and condescension cast my way. I have never voiced my opinion publicly. Our fear that an American might ask me to leave this country and go back to where I came from. Once when I went to see a dentist in Bethesda, I was told by the dentist, who is an older gentleman, that the Asian dress I was wearing reminded him of his horrible memories of the Vietnam War. Just because of my Asian face and the cultural dress, he assumed that I was Vietnamese and that all Vietnamese were enemies of the US. I felt hurt and I was shocked and speechless. To be fair, now I reflect back, I should mention that his intention might not be malicious and my interpretation might have been incorrect. However, it's best not to stereotype anyone. Since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, Asian Americans have been terrified by the alarming surge in violence against them due to the misinformation and the stigma that inappropriately associate coronavirus with Asian Americans. But what started out from dirty looks and verbal attacks has escalated to physical attacks and violence against Asian Americans in the past year. Our former President Donald Trump used racial slurs like Wuhan virus and China plague, despite the warning from the CDC and WHO not to associate the virus with a specific ethnicity, country, or geographic region. America saw a surge in anti-Asian violence during the joyful time of Chinese New Year. Many of the victims have been older and vulnerable. In New York, a 61-year-old Asian American man was attacked and his face was slashed ear to ear with a box cutter in the subway, requiring 100 stitches. In Georgia, 8 people, including 6 Asian American women, were murdered by a gunman who targeted 3 Asian small businesses. Those hate crime victims could have been my relatives, my friends, my sisters, or my neighbors. In March 2020, during an organized trip with my son and his scout troop, a parent of my son's friend pretended to jump away from me quickly while saying Wuhan virus. He was laughing, but it was not a laughing matter. He did not realize that his behavior caused others a lot of agony. Was his ignorance or arrogance? The fact that an individual is from a specific geographic area has nothing to do with the way he respects fellow human beings. Every person should regard as an honorable human being, unless he proves otherwise by his actions. It's sad to say that I should consider myself lucky because I have not yet been physically attacked, even though I am an Asian American. I have been spending most of my time hiding at home since the terrible violence took place in Georgia. Tragically, discrimination against Asian Americans is a painful part of American history. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was the only law which has been implemented to bar all members of a national group from immigrating to the United States. During World War II, incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans is another dark episode of our recent history. In 1982, Vincent Chin was murdered by two white men in Highland Park, Michigan, because they assumed that he was Japanese and blamed him for the Japanese automotive imports and the unemployment of American auto industry. Unfortunately, Asian American history is not taught in our schools. Excluding Asian American from American history makes us invisible and regards us as perpetual foreigners. Not that violence against foreigners is justified. In fact, I'm dreaming of a day when the word foreigner is expunged from our vocabulary. Historian Erica Lee wrote in her book, The Making of Asian America. It's very clear that whatever immigrant problem was identified in our country was often tied to a public health outbreak in the past. When yellow fever struck Pennsylvania in the 18th centuries, it was called the German flu. Jewish immigrant was blamed with bringing typhoid. Italians were accused of polio outbreak in the East Coast. This incident of xenophobia and racism has damaging effect on immigrants' mental and physical health. In a recent Washington Post article, CDC director named racism a public health threat that affects the health of our entire nation. Awareness statements are not enough. They needed to be followed with action, said the Chief Public Health Officer for Georgetown University. She also added, this ongoing and multi-generational assault causes physiological changes in how certain hormones are released. For example, heightened stress can also contribute to obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetics. For you to be able to take part in the fight against racism and in solidarity with the Asian American and Pacific Islanders. English Now and the Washington Center for International Education provide opportunity for you and your family member to participate in multiple student service week activity. Racism is not only a US issue, but an international challenge. Think globally and serve locally. Thank you. I'm glad to able to share this important subject with everyone.
Yeah.
Back to Paul.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you. As your words settle, we really appreciate your comments. They're very heartfelt and very meaningful. And what we're going to, Sally and I talked beforehand. I'm going to continue with some additional comments. It was her preference that we go through the two presentations, and then we'll come back for questions. When we do, I'd like to invite you all to pose questions to Sally first, and then to us both or to me. But Sally, your words are really meaningful, so we'll start with you when we come back. I will take a bit of a different approach. I'll share a presentation that I prepared to go from some personal comments to also to step back a bit, reflecting my different perspective of these issues. So thank you all for joining us, and it's hard to follow on your presentation, Sally. I must say, you've experienced this in ways that I haven't. But at the same time, I hope to hopefully add something. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's an idiom that's present, I know, in Chinese language and Japanese and Korean as well. But the idea is one that's very important. This pandemic has affected us all dramatically in the last 15, 16 months, but it has also affected us differently. And I think it is worth reflecting on the fact that it has affected Asians and Asian Americans in ways that are distinctive and that we need to understand. As we do this, I wanted to introduce a simple framework. I want to give credit for the first part of this to a woman named Dr. Beverly Tatum. Beverly Tatum was the president of Spelman University for about 15 years. She is an outstanding educator and is a nationally renowned speaker on issues related to race. The first 3 points are hers: affirm identity as we think about these kinds of issues, build community, and then cultivate leadership. This is the response of an educator, and since many of us here are educators, I wanted to share this. I'd like to add a couple of thoughts that cultivating courage is also important. Courage to address difficult topics. Also, the idea of diversity as a positive value. And finally, e pluribus unum, out of many one, which I'll reflect on a little bit at the end of the conversation. This is a framework potentially for us to think about these kinds of issues. Some comments to start. I'd like to express gratitude, especially to my, I'm very fortunate to have many friends and colleagues from all over the world, but amongst those that I'm most grateful for are my friends from Asia. So Sally, your comments are heartfelt in a way that I really, really appreciate. Thank you so much. Also to call out a colleague of mine, Marx Wong, who's joining us today. Marx is a colleague of mine from Greenpoint, and I'm helped with some background research that supports the remarks that I'm going to make. Marx is a graduate of George Washington University, a fantastic man, scholar, and colleague. So glad to have him with us today too. And also, it's worth noting, just generally, that cultural diversity enriches us in so many ways. So even the design of this PowerPoint slides, credit to Na-Young Lee, our Korean friend and colleague who does graphic design work for the English Now School community and does it so beautifully. As an example, there's so many things that come out of cultural exchange, and many thanks to my many Asian friends, those and others. My hope for today include simply exchanging views. So we'll have some discussion at the end. My hopes for tomorrow, I will mention an activity that's coming up Saturday. I will mention that at the end. And my personal perspective, I'm going to tell you coming from, I'll show you this is a graph that reflects on the changing face of America. So this shows America from a demographic perspective between 1960 and 2060. And I start here because my family and I am located at the left side of this. The America I grew up in was a different country than it is today, and a different country than it will be. My parents were born in a country that was around 86 or 87% white, and the vast majority of other Americans at that time were African American. We live in such a different world today, and that is continuing. Now, research was done in 2015. The reduced pace of immigration has perhaps slowed this trend, but it hasn't changed it. And as we think about today, since 1965, 3 out of 10 immigrants have been from Asia. So it's important to note Asia is such a diverse region, is extraordinary. And that diversity is playing out not only generally, but also as we think about Asian Americans in ways that we can't really fully address today. Continuing to reflect on history a bit, one of the things I realize that we've done at English Now is occasionally, we'll talk about topics related to immigration. And we take people for a virtual tour, for example, of Ellis Island. We have left out the story of Angel Island. Angel Island is an immigration hub on the West Coast in California. Between 1910 and 1940, most Asians who were traveling to the U.S. in that time frame passed through Angel Island. And so reflecting the way we need to think a little bit differently, the next time we talk about the story of immigration, one of our frequent outings, Francis Williams, who's with us today too, does this so well. And I give you great credit, Francis, for the way you invite people to think deeply through these experiences. But it'll be interesting to look at the story of Angel Island, which is one that we don't have time for in full today, but it reflects the way that sometimes the way we tell the story of history is not balanced and not complete. To continue a bit, Sally told us about the first 3 of these points, but I wanted to add a couple more. The Chinese Exclusion Act is one of the most horrific pieces of legislation that's ever been passed in this country. If you've not read it, if you're if you have any orientation towards this kind of thing, you should. It's extraordinary. Then there's the story of the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Over 60% of those interned were American citizens, fully naturalized. There's the murder, reflecting the way that sometimes these things happen. Vincent Chin was not Japanese. So the fact that there be violence against an Asian person is wrong and horrific. But here's a man who was killed because people mistook him for Japanese. He wasn't Japanese. This is the kind of thing that we can do better than this. Then and this is happening again now. In the 1950s in the U.S., there was a widespread movement called McCarthyism, which accused anyone of Chinese ancestry of being a communist. This overly simplistic lumping together of nationality and political orientation, with international geopolitics, that's inexcusable, and it's happening again now. There are problems with what's happening in China, absolutely. There are political issues related to China, absolutely. But again, we can do better than this. And in fact, I had the privilege of working with a woman named Julia Chang Block for 3 years. She was my boss between 2008 and 2010. She was the first Asian American to reach ambassadorial rank. She was appointed ambassador to Nepal in 1988. Julia is one of America's most talented diplomats. She was the number 2 person at USAID in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Systematically passed over for positions related to China, a country where she could have helped us enormously in our dealings with China in those days. But at that point, discrimination against Asian Americans was formal. In fact, if you were of Chinese ancestry, you were not able to work in the State Department or in a national security role on China. How silly. Surprising then that continues to this day. In a survey done earlier this year, 70% of Asian American professionals in the State Department, said that either they are excluded from roles because of ancestry or their heritage, or they're either formally excluded and they have geographic categorization assigned to them, or such discrimination is still in place but informal. 70% of State Department professionals of Asian American heritage said that in a poll earlier this year. Again, that we can do better than this. Then there's recent history. I won't dwell on Donald Trump. I don't want to. But some things have happened in the last few years that make this story even more stark. President Trump's consistent racist rhetoric, and that's what it was absolutely embarrassing. I am ashamed by some of the things he said. And this was formal as well. The Department of Justice has undertaken an initiative called the China Initiative, which is exclusively based on race, in a way that, again, there are real security concerns related to China. There are real security concerns related to national interests. But we can do better than some of the broad brush way that policy has been applied. And Asian Americans, not only Chinese Americans, but others as well, are being affected by this. WCIE's one of gone through a security clearance process that took 6 word that she's the role of senior related in part for 16 months to get that security clearance. That's not the way that the process should work. We're making mistakes too often based on race. And this is extended far beyond Trump, far beyond just politics. The hate crime indexes of the numbers of hate crimes against Asian Americans has increased by more than 150% in the last year and a half. The Atlanta spa shootings which attracted a lot of attention to this issue, are a tragedy and are well documented. But still, people, included elected politicians at high levels in state governments, still continue to talk like this, still continue to use terminology that is reflective of this racist underlying way of thinking. And that's affecting us in ways that will extend generations. Right now, America hosts over 350,000 Chinese students, undergraduate and graduate students. They're amazing students. They contribute enormously, to American college and university campuses. This is affecting how that they'll view our country going forward, decades and decades, as they then contribute to the world and to their own society, and perhaps to ours too. And it's local too. In Montgomery County, Maryland, there were 10 hate crimes that were reported against Asian Americans in the last year. How many went unreported? So this is not only a global, not only a national, but it's also a local issue, and a very real one. So I'll wind up my comments quickly. What can we do? Whatever our roles, if we are in the education world, one of the things that Sally mentioned, and that I think is really something to reflect on, is understanding our history better. It is always a mistake to not pay attention to history. Here, maybe more than in other areas. Also, for what it's worth, as we think about relationships and we think about our communities, encouraging Asian Americans to pursue political and other influential positions and support them as they do so. Part of allyship is coming alongside and coming in support of other people. And that's something that, maybe in our own worlds, wherever we find ourselves interacting in our communities, in our companies, in our jobs, however, this is another way that we perhaps can take action and have impact. There are also ways that we can support cross-cultural and people-to-people exchanges, even when it's not easy. And this is something I've been thinking a lot of with regards to our school community. There are things we could do that would be creative, be perhaps ways to encourage connections that unfortunately aren't happening like they should right now. And so maybe we'll see some of that happening in the next year or two. And finally, at a stepping way back and we think about at a national level, we need to look for areas of cooperation and collaboration on big topics like climate change, even as we might differ in a political sense, from a country like China, on issues related to human rights. We need to look at the big picture and understand that there are stories being told at so many different levels at the same time. Again, I won't talk at length about that, but sometimes, unfortunately, we become overly simplistic in the way we view an issue, a monolithic concept of the world that unfortunately doesn't correspond to facts. And what should we do as individuals? Here I'll come back to the framework I'd introduced initially, affirming identity. Okay, so maybe this is a point in time where we need to understand and affirm identity a bit more than in past periods of history. Maybe we can't quite set aside race and ethnicity right now, even if we might want to. That includes some things that we need to work on. So the model minority myth is not healthy. It puts unfair expectations around a person that may not apply to their own unique situation. So the model minority myth, we need to set that aside. This perpetual foreigner myth, which Sally mentioned. Thank you. I didn't know you were going to use those words, Sally. But this is something which, we need to get beyond this. Just because somebody's from their family may have come from a cultural setting that's quite different than a Western European setting, it doesn't mean they'll be a foreigner forever. Absolutely not. The sexualization of Asian women, which led to these Georgia murders, that is just wrong. It needs to stop. It needs to be called out for what it is. And other stereotypes. There's other ways that sometimes people make mistakes, and it's just we need to affirm identity, and do so positively, and set aside some of these incorrect ways of looking at race and ethnicity. We need to build community, develop relationships that cross over racial and ethnic lines, even when it's not a crisis. And that's something why I'm so glad that today, here we are, a group of 20 people on this call. That's a great way for us to build some community, come together across racial and ethnic lines, reflect for a bit. We're together in this, and that's something we need to do more of. Cultivating courage, even if it's hard to talk about these issues. This is not a pleasant conversation at some level. These are not good things, but they're important things to call out, to talk about. And finally, looking at diversity as a positive value. This is another topic that's worth thinking deeply about. There's a lot of research that indicates that groups of people that come together that reflect diversity of race and ethnicity, also diversity of ages, young, middle, and older people coming together, gender diversity. Coming together across these categories reflects people's unique backgrounds, differences, strengths, and the sum is greater than the parts when that happens. This is a great strength. It can be a great strength to groups if we don't permit ourselves to be captured by some of the malintent that sometimes accompanies differences in the way that people look across race and ethnicity. And finally, I'll finish with this. I want to. This is easier for me to say. It's easy for me, because I'm a white male, to finish with a note of hope. So I want to apologize as I do so. But I do want to share with you that there are things happening here that are maybe a little bit bigger than we can see right now. This is a simple chart that shows racial and ethnic diversity in the American Congress. It shows a 20-year story that is quite significant. And as we look at, it's maybe hard to read, but the number of Asian American members of Congress who are going from the 107th Congress in 2001 to the current Congress has gone from 7 to 17. And it's my bet, based on the many, many people who have often shown a great and increasing instinct to public service, who come from an Asian American background. I'm guessing that number is going to be 27 and then 37 and then more. And I look forward to a country that is influenced by those elected members of our society. And that being one narrow way to look at it, this is national government. This does not tell the whole story at all. But some things are happening here that I think will be quite profound over time. And it's in that e pluribus unum, out of many one hope. That's where I find hope here. It's not an easy story along the way, but that's it. I'll finish with a brief invitation. We're going to do a very purposeful walk on Saturday. Now, this is part of our Community Service Week initiative. We're going to start at the Chinatown Arch. We're going to reflect there, and we're going to learn a little bit about the Chinatown story. What is this in Washington, D.C.? If you've not been there, please come, learn a little bit, understand a little bit more of the local history associated with that. We're going to then walk to the National Museum of African American History on the Mall, and we're going to learn a bit there. And then we'll walk to the MLK Memorial. It's about a 2-mile walk total. We will be taking precautions, groups of 5 maximum. It's important that we be very aware there's still a pandemic raging. We need to be very safe. But this is a walk with a purpose. We invite you to join. And if you're interested in doing so, please email this email address, and we'll make sure to get you information. But wanted to end with that invitation. That's it. Thank you. And I will invite Sally back into the spotlight. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm sorry that my comments maybe went on too long, but I'd like to turn back to Sally and invite questions for Sally first, and then for us both, or for me.
Okay, since no one is talking, of course, I'll start.
Thanks,
I'm Barbara Lewis. Yes, here, my video. Okay, I just would like to ask Sally, Paul, they were both very thoughtful talks and really resonated with a lot of us, I'm sure, certainly with me. But Sally, I'd like to ask you specifically, how do you feel that individuals can help you and other Asian Americans feel more at home? Paul suggested a few things, but I'd like to know from you, what do you think would make things better for your community that we could do individually?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think in the United States, and people are from diverse backgrounds, and people are from everywhere. I think it's best not to make assumption or stereotype people, and also just to be respectful. I think lots of times people will assume and will always have the question that, where are you from? Because we just don't look American, because we don't look, we're not black, we're not white, and we just not look American. And people always have that question in mind. I just feel that if we can move on, we can stop stereotype people and say that a certain group of people do certain things. And I think that's actually, I think that's kind of like a human nature. We all have, we cannot be active, thinking all the time about every issues. So we have make decision from our experience, but it's important that we keep that in mind so that we don't make very make people feel difficult and make people feel bad when they are actually part of America and they are American. And that's what I think. And it's very hard to do so. And I sometimes tell myself too, because I think unconsciously we might have done all those things. But then if we reflect on it and we remind ourselves, we can avoid those situations happen to other people. Thank you,
Okay.
Barbara.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, and maybe I think many of us feel, well, I don't discriminate and I don't stereotype, but I'm sure that we all unconsciously do. I know, even though, you know, I look at myself and I say, do I discriminate? Do I do those things? And then I'm thinking, oh, I can't, but I'm sure I do. I just need to be more aware, perhaps, of and more sensitive to other people. And I don't know if other people would like to speak to this.
Yes, yes. And Lily, would you like to tell us how
Yes.
you have been living in the United States much longer than me? You have actually moved here when you are only a child, so you must have more experience and story to tell us.
Thank you so much. First, greetings to everyone. I'm based in Washington, D.C. We were introduced by a common friend, so I have never met Sally yet in person, but I have great respect for her leadership and thought leadership. When I received the invitation to this today, I was very touched. Number one, thank you, Sally, for giving voice to your own personal experiences during this very tough time. And thank you also to Ms. Lewis, who framed a very interesting comment. It is the kindness and the goodness of Americans that has been the hallmark. I'm tearing up because this has been so hard. We've been invited to Thanksgiving lunches and dinners. I still remember our first one as a child of 7. I did not know what to do with all the forks and knives, and oh my God, it was like we just used chopsticks. But the hostess very kindly winked and said, just work your way in from the outside. So those are the, Thanksgiving will always be my fondest memory of the goodness of Americans. So what I wanted to ask Sally is that indeed, our family came very early. The change in the immigration law by President Johnson in 1965 enabled a lot of folks like my parents. My father came abroad to do his graduate studies, and so I came as a young child. So Sally and I are like the bookends of the Chinese American experience. So I never had children, but I wondered, the question for Sally is, in the African American tradition, they always talk about the talk that parents must have with their children, especially the Black young men. So how have you broached this with your own child? How have you been able to, number one, teach him about the situation in an objective way, and then also not have him be afraid? And I guess the most practical question is, when they're allowed to go back to school, many parents are deciding not to. Many Chinese American parents are deciding not to just out of fear. Have you made your own personal decision? And thank you so much for inviting me. And both you and Professor Paul have really shared some beautiful thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. We had make a decision that we're not going back to school, and we'll be just continue at home for another 2 months, studying at home. And I have spoken to my son, and my husband also have spoken to my son. And being a teenager, I think he just told us that I have never experienced any racism against me. And he also said that, look, I'm not a Chinese, I'm American. So I think that's kind of made me feel very sad, because I have been getting him to learn Chinese culture and to go to Chinese school every weekend. But in the end, he does not feel extremely power being part as Chinese and his heritage. I hope that in time, when he gets older, he will change. But that's the dilemma we are facing now. We want him to assimilate to the American culture, but we don't want him to forget his heritage. But it's really, really hard to do so. And it just made me feel very sad. And he dislike, when he traveling, he dislike China. Kind of like he liked the Chinese culture, he liked the architecture, he liked sightseeing trips that he made in China. But I think he having a difficult to adjust that himself, that the heritage is so important as a mixed cultural family. And I hope that when he go older, he will take advantage of his Chinese background and his language background. And we'll see how him turn out. But I see lots of people who actually grow up in the United States and have multiple backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and language backgrounds, and they really treasure what they have. And I hope that's what my son will turn out to be. And I'm hopeful. Thank you, Lily.
Wendy?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Francis, you have it?
Oh, no, other people had their hands up. It's okay. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Francis.
Oh, well, it was just to talk about, I mean, I think things will change, Sally, because you know, I'm from Scotland. It's not quite the same thing, I know, but with today's discussion, but my son didn't feel Scottish at all. He had no interest in Scottish culture. He grew up overseas, but went to American international schools. And this is our home base here. So he felt very American and had no interest in Scottish culture. But as he got older, he realized that, you know, I think teenagers, they don't want to be different. They want to kind of fit in, you know, with their peers. And then as he got older, he realized, hey, this is kind of cool. I have two nationalities here. And now he's more interested. And I have a lot of friends who have similar problems with their kids. You know, they just want to be American or wherever they're living, but it does change. I'm sure it will change. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Francis.
Thanks. And Wendy, I think you had a question.
You are muted, Wendy.
Wendy, you're muted.
Thank you. Well, that was a dress rehearsal. Sally, thank you so much. I think you're an excellent speaker. And when the question was asked, what can we do about all this? How can we make a difference? What's going through my mind is whether, you know, how can you get out what you just did for us potentially to other organizations? Or how can we share this kind of program that you and Paul just, you know, just really made us stop, made us think, made us reflect, made us look at ourselves. Like Barbara said, you know, we like to think we're not this way. However, are we in some ways? What are we doing? And I just felt that how can we package this is my question. How can this be shared? So more, you know, every organizations are doing different things, but how can we share this?
Right now we're thankful for Paul having organized the community service week. I think part of doing the community service week with the teenagers, with the high schoolers, and that's one way we can do to serve locally, to serve the people here, and also we can help others to understand what exactly is American culture and what American do. And I think that's one thing we can really do right now. And Paul may have more to say.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'll comment at the end about some additional quick thoughts. But Amy, question for Sally?
As I listen, Sally, again, I would really comment and be very thankful for your speech. And I know we've worked together in the
Yes.
past, and it's wonderful to see you. And you speak so clearly and understandably. And I listen to everything from a global perspective. And I resonate with all of your thoughts and feelings. And what came to me suddenly in the last 5 minutes is I have 3 Chinese American nieces. And during the talk, I did not think about that because I was focused on the global nature of the talk. But what is closest to home for each of us in regards to the racism that is going on in the Asian American community? And I thought this afternoon, certainly I will arrange a Zoom call with my 3 very American Chinese nieces, and they are also beautiful and so multi-talented, much more so than my children, or they are the only Asian contingent in our family, but we see their talent is so immense. So I will ask them and begin a conversation to see if they have encountered any racism in the suburbs of Chicago where they live. So thank you, because it brings it to my attention. They may be suffering and not speaking about it. They're all grown to their 20s and beyond. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Amy. Yes, I'm thankful for the teachers in English now. They have been helping me with improving my English over a year. And you cannot imagine my English when I start, I was not able to speak very clearly. And yeah, I think by doing that, like what Amy said, when you actually able to discuss this with your relatives, your friends, and your neighbors, and you are actually being a bridge for different cultures in the United States, I think that's just important to start from ourselves and start from what we can do. And a famous quote, I think, is to say that like we cannot help everyone, but if we can help someone. So the person we help next to our house and being active in your community, and also it will be helpful for all the different racial groups here and become really feel proud to be part of American society. Thank you, Amy.
Great. And maybe perhaps one more question for Sally. Nancy Wolf.
Sally, you know,
Yes.
you just, it was amazing what you said, and so thoughtful and deep. And one thing that I've always been interested in is this issue of the model minority, the stereotype that comes because of some work I've done with college kids applying to colleges. And how do you know, stereotypes can be negative, but you know, they can flip and be positive. And so people sort of expect Asian Americans to be hardworking and successful, and you know, everybody, it must be pressure on the teenagers to
Yes.
feel that they have to live up to these. It's not really a positive stereotype. I don't want to say it like that, but there's a certain sense, the model minority. Can you speak more to that? Because I think, I don't know how we get beyond that.
Yes, especially I think model minority is a stereotype. And then, yeah, it's true that like, well, first of all, Asian Americans, there's many subgroups under Asian American. There's Chinese, there's Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and smaller subgroups like the Laos or other Thais, and many of them, and according to the census, many of them are not doing well economically and educational. They're not doing well. Many of them are not going to college, and they are suffering. But because the title of model minority, we did not pay attention to those people because we feel that they are doing well. We just say that it's just like we did not pay attention. We did not keep them in mind. We just kind of dismiss that, and making them, making the people who are suffering still suffering because we did not know, we did not recognize that's actually exists, that problem exists in the American society. We just want to label them as moral minority. And of course, it gives pressure to lots of young kids. And that's why, last year I did, with Montgomery County, I did a certificate on mental health first aid, which because lots of Asian Americans and the young kids are suffering from mental health because of the stress that they're facing, because their parents asking them, when you're getting 99%, your parents will ask you, where's the 1%? You're not going to able to get to a good college if you don't get the 1%. And the parents are very stressed. Parents are stressed out and the kids are also stressed out. So that's why, and my son also, I think he always dismiss, when we say, how's your homework? He dismiss our comments, or with, he say, I don't need your help and I can do very well. And we feel that that doesn't want to talk about it is some kind of cowering for what they actually feel. And sometimes I feel helpless myself. And yeah. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, let me get a round of applause for Sally.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you very much. And yeah, we have maybe time for a couple more questions, and then we didn't have a firm end of the talk, but maybe just a couple more questions, and then we'll wind up. Thank you for everybody.
Can I ask a question, or rather make a comment?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, this was wonderful, amazing. And I have a very close friend I spoke to the other day, and I'm going to tell you her story. So her parents were on the last ship from China to Taiwan. They were on that last ship. Her mother was pregnant with her, my friend. And so she was born in Taiwan. She and her husband came to the States in around 1974, and they had 2 kids. The first daughter went to Yale, majored in art history, and her thesis was Scholar Rocks, okay? Then she went back to Yale for her MBA. The son joined the Navy because it was just after 9/11. He joined the Navy and he became an officer. His choice was to be in nuclear submarines, so he was all over the world. They didn't know where he was. He was in nuclear submarines. He was also sent, because he was so talented, to Russia to study there and focus on Russia military arms, something like that. Okay, and then he worked at the Pentagon. Okay, so that's his background. Now he's working in high tech. He went to MIT, got another master's in business and high tech. And he was marching with the Black Lives Matter. Even with COVID, everyone had to wear a mask. He went on many marches, out of, solidarity. So now the family is concerned about what's going on. And they're like hiding, at home, not making appearances. Both of her kids, she has 4 grandkids, and she is very worried about the oldest, who has gone back to school. She's very worried about that. So this is what they're thinking. She's thinking, as well as her brother, the whole family, if she can convince her kids to move to Hawaii or back to Taiwan or China. This is how much it's affecting her. And it's a surprising reaction coming from her. She's, became a nurse here, and it's just a surprising reaction. So that's that story, yeah. Very personal.
True.
Yeah, thanks, Madge.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Anna?
So just a brief comment. I was thinking about what Paul said about diversity as a positive value, right? and so my youngest daughter applied to college a year ago, and we visited like 15 colleges with her. And then when we visited NYU, she said, oh, I want to come here. And I said, okay, but you need to choose to apply to different other colleges. Of course, you don't know if you're gonna get accepted, right? And then she said, no, I'm not going to apply to any other colleges because I want to go to NYU. I said, why? And then because she said, it was the only place I felt that diversity was a real value. And then we had a hard time to convince her to apply to 3 or 4 more colleges. And I'm glad she was accepted at NYU. She's very happy there, but it was very hard to feel that it was not a real value in many other places. And so I think it's really important to start speaking more about diversity as a positive value.
Yeah, if you just make a quick follow-on comment to there has been some very interesting thinking about in higher education about affirmative action. There was a very well-known legal case brought against Harvard around 3 years ago because of Harvard's the way that Harvard used race in the way that it scores applicants. And many Asian American friends of mine have been this is a problem because ultimately their children are perhaps penalized unfairly by these systems. And I wanted to be very, very specific about like the way that these systems work to comment on this idea of diversity as a positive value. So diversity as a positive value can suggest that race be considered and that race as one or ethnic background as one one type of diversity be considered as we think about what a group would look like. In other words, it can be a good thing. We can all benefit from some measure of diversity. One of the problematic aspects of Harvard's scoring system was the way that they coded different measures of soft skills to ascribe a score, a numerical score associated with a candidate's personality. And if you look in detail at the way that Harvard scored personality, unquestionably there was bias in the way that personality was scored. And different personality attributes and personality traits were intermingled in a way that is, when you look at it, and indeed, an amicus brief, about this topic looked at 150,000 scores on this metric, and indeed there was cultural bias in the way that these soft skill measurements were done. So, can you say that race and ethnicity can be an idea that would lead to a positive sense of diversity? My own personal view is you can. But at the same time, you have to be really careful because these kinds of things can lead to either outright or implicit bias in the way that you might make judgments if you try to create a system to do this. So, anyways, there's a lot there. But thank you very much, for your reference to this idea. It's a very, very important idea, and one that we're so fortunate to have present in our school community. We can all feel it. It's not NYU. we're very small and very, it's very modest, but at the same time, it's hopefully a little bit of that feeling.
Professor Paul, this is Lily Liu again. I think it would be very interesting for your students because now in the HR departments of companies, the usual diversity and inclusion phrase has become diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everyone's probably going to go through another round of trainings, but I think it would be interesting for your students, and I'm not as familiar with your organization, but I think just trying to understand the word equity in that context would be an interesting session. I myself am still confused because now it's all about DEI instead of D and I. It's a new phenomenon post BLM and now the Asian hate.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's that. Thank you. Good point. And this is, yeah, definitely worth. Maybe we'll have another discussion like this at some point, because it would be, these are important topics. Maybe time for just one more, and then we'll finish up. One more question, if anybody has one. If not, we can wind up. But thank you so much for. Hearing none. Marks, thank you for sharing an article. Marks shared a very good New York Times article that y'all might might be interested in the chat. Anyways, we'll wind up here. Thank you so much all for taking time out of your days. Thank you, Alice, so much for your for being about 20 people together on this call. That's a great way we can think about, in the context of Community Service Week, building a little bit of community, by having the courage to have a discussion that might not otherwise happen. Maybe we can do more of that together. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, please stay in touch. If you are interested in joining this walk, please email the email address I shared. It's communityservice@washingtoncie.org. We'll get you information that will be very socially distanced and safe, but at the same time, it's short notice, and we know that many people aren't doing that kind of thing, and I understand that completely. But there'll be more opportunities in the future. Thank you for being part of our school community today, everyone. Have a great day, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Hi, Yuki.
Hi.
Hi, Yuki.
Hi, Mai.
Bye.
Nice to see you all at the school.
Yeah, have a great day. Bye.
Have a
Bye.
great day. See you.
Barbara, you are muted. Were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say to any teachers that are left, on Breaking News English, which is a website we use frequently to teach, there is a wonderful small teaching lesson on racism, which I've used with 3 of my different classes.
Oh,
And
great.
Oh
it
my God,
just
yeah.
stimulates the best conversations. It's just great. If anybody uses Breaking News English, take a look right now, because it's an excellent article. And this past week, I've just been doing nothing but racism, or not really nothing, but a lot of racism.
Oh, hey, but could you send me that link? Do you have
Yeah,
a link?
absolutely.
Super.
I'll
I'll circulate it on the group chat.
Thank
That's
you. Paul.
fantastic.
Yeah, because
So
it's
helpful.
been, I mean, that's what we've been talking about all week. So this was so relevant to me to hear you guys talking too. And I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
So it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
both. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye all.